welcome to our deep dive into the world of behavior analysis and learning.
Yeah.
You've given us some fascinating excerpts from a behavior analysis textbook.
Uh-huh.
And well, we're going to help you sift through it all.
Yeah, we'll break it all down, make it nice and easy to understand.
Extract the gems.
The real gems.
Okay, so let's just start with the basics.
Sure.
What is behavior analysis?
No,
I mean, is it just a fancy way of saying psychology?
not quite.
Okay.
Behavior analysis is a science rooted in the principles of learning.
Okay.
Think of it like physics or chemistry, but instead of studying matter and energy, we're studying behavior.
So you're looking at what people actually do
Exactly.
instead of like,
Yeah.
observable, trying to guess what's going on inside their heads.
Measurable.
Got it.
And we're interested in the why behind actions, and we believe that why lies in the consequences of those actions.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Our source material jumps right into this idea of consequences shaping behavior in different levels.
Yeah.
And it talked about something called selection by consequences.
Uh-huh.
And I've got to admit, this is where I started getting a little lost.
Well, it's a fascinating concept.
Okay.
B.F. Skinner, one of the big names in behavior analysis,
Okay.
proposed 3 levels of selection by consequence. And it starts with the familiar one, natural selection,
Right.
where genes are passed down based on survival and reproduction.
Survival of the fittest.
Like, you know how giraffes with longer necks could reach more leaves and thrive?
Okay, so that's level 1. What about the other 2?
So the second level is operant selection.
Okay.
This is where behavior analysis really shines.
Okay.
It's all about how behaviors are shaped during an individual's lifetime based on what happens after they do something.
So if I try a new recipe and it turns out amazing, I'm more likely to make it again.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
You got it.
Okay.
Think about training a dog.
Mm-hmm.
You give a treat when the dog sits on command.
Okay.
The treat is the consequence. And because it's positive, the dog is more likely to sit again.
So it's not just about animals learning tricks. It's about how all of our behaviors, even complex human ones,
Yes.
are influenced by their consequences.
That applies to all kinds of behavior.
Pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But what about the third level of selection?
Right.
Our textbook mentions cultural selection.
Yes.
How does that fit in?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Sorry?
Cultural selection is about how practices and behaviors evolve in groups over time. Again, based on their consequences.
Okay.
Think about language, for example.
Okay. But how did language evolve through consequences?
Well, imagine early humans trying to communicate about food sources or dangers.
Uh-huh.
The ones who could convey information clearly and effectively were more likely to survive and pass on those communication skills.
So over time, language became more sophisticated because it helped groups survive and thrive.
Exactly.
It's like natural selection, but for behaviors within a culture.
Exactly. And the textbook gives another interesting example.
Okay.
Superstitions. Some superstitions might have actually helped people survive.
Okay.
Imagine a tribe avoiding a certain area because they believe it's cursed.
Uh-huh.
If that area actually had a high concentration of predators,
Right.
that superstition would increase their chances of survival, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. So those superstitions would get passed down, even if the original reason was forgotten.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder how many of our beliefs and behaviors have been shaped by this process over generations.
Right.
But let's zoom back in to the individual level.
Okay.
Our source material talks about 2 types of behavior,
Okay.
respondent and operant.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference?
So respondent behavior, think of your reflexes.
Okay.
It's automatic and involuntary, triggered by a specific stimulus.
Okay.
Like that knee-jerk reaction when the doctor taps on your knee,
Yeah.
or think about how you jump at a loud noise.
So it's like a built-in response, nothing
Yeah.
to do with learning.
Well, not entirely. Some respondent behaviors are innate, but they can also be learned through a process called classical conditioning.
Oh, yeah.
Remember Pavlov's dogs?
Yeah.
They learned to salivate at the sound of a bell because it was paired with food.
Right, so they started associating the bell with the food and having like an automatic response.
Exactly.
That makes me think about how I get anxious just thinking about going to the dentist.
Uh-huh.
It's not the actual drilling, it's the anticipation
Right,
of it.
exactly.
Yeah.
That anxiety is a learned respondent behavior.
Oh, okay.
Your past experiences have conditioned you to associate the dentist with potential discomfort.
Wow, so even seemingly simple things like fear responses
Yeah.
are rooted in these learning principles.
Uh-huh.
But then what about operant behavior?
Right.
How's that different?
So operant behavior is all about voluntary actions that we take based on the consequences we expect.
Okay.
It's about choices and learning from our experiences. Like if you study hard and get a good grade, That positive consequence makes you more likely to study hard again.
So respondent behavior is like a reflex,
Yeah.
and operant behavior is more like a deliberate action.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're constantly learning and adapting our behaviors based on consequences,
Right.
both positive and negative.
Exactly.
But the textbook also talks about how often those consequences occur,
Uh-huh.
like with reinforcement schedules.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So reinforcement schedules are all about timing.
Okay.
They determine how often and how consistently a behavior is reinforced.
Okay.
There's continuous reinforcement where every single time you do the behavior, you get the reward.
Uh-huh.
Think of a vending machine, you put in money, you get your snack every time.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing there are more complex schedules too, right?
You bet there's intermittent reinforcement,
Okay.
where the reward only comes sometimes this is where things get really interesting.
I have a feeling this is where the aha moments come in.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Think about slot machines.
Okay.
You pull the lever over and over again, not knowing when you'll hit the jackpot.
Okay.
That unpredictability is what makes them so addictive.
So even though you're not winning, every time that occasional win is enough to keep you hooked.
Exactly.
It's like those mobile games where you get a little reward every few levels.
Yeah.
Suddenly I'm seeing reinforcement schedules everywhere.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
These principles are at work all around us, shaping our behavior in ways we often don't even realize.
This is already making me look at the world in a whole new way.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I can't wait to see what other insights we uncover.
Yeah, me too.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more.
Sounds good.
Okay, my brain is officially buzzing with all these reinforcement schedules.
Yeah.
It's like I'm seeing patterns everywhere now.
It is pretty amazing.
But the textbook also mentions something called punishment.
Right.
Isn't that another way we learn?
Yeah, punishment is definitely part of the learning equation,
Great.
but it's a much more complex and controversial topic than reinforcement.
Okay, so if a child touches a hot stove
Right.
and gets burned,
Right.
they learn not to touch it again.
That's a natural consequence.
Okay.
That acts as a punisher, yes.
Great.
But punishment can also be deliberately applied, like grounding a teenager for breaking curfew.
Right. But doesn't punishment sometimes have like unintended side effects?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it can lead to more aggressive behavior.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Okay.
One of the big questions in behavior analysis is whether punishment actually changes behavior in the long term.
Right.
Or just suppresses it temporarily.
Okay.
And then there's the ethical aspect to consider as well.
So if you punish a child for hitting their sibling,
Right.
are you actually teaching them not to hit? Or are they just learning to hide it better?
Yeah.
And what about like the emotional impact of punishment?
Yeah.
It seems like it could backfire pretty easily.
Exactly. It's important to remember that behavior analysis emphasizes understanding and changing behavior in a humane and ethical way.
Okay.
Punishment is a tool that needs to be used with extreme caution, if at all.
That makes sense. It's not about just controlling behavior.
Right.
It's about creating positive change.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, the textbook brings up a phenomenon called learned helplessness.
Yeah.
What is that exactly?
So learned helplessness is a really interesting, albeit somewhat disheartening phenomenon.
Okay.
It describes a situation where someone, or even an animal, is repeatedly exposed to a negative situation they can't escape from.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, they just give up,
It's-
even when escape becomes possible.
So it's like they learn that their efforts are pointless.
Yeah,
So why even try?
exactly.
That's kind of depressing.
It is, and it highlights the importance of having a sense of control over our lives.
Okay.
You know, the classic experiment involved dogs being subjected to unavoidable electric shocks.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, they stopped even trying to avoid the shocks, even when they could easily escape.
Wow, that's really sad.
Yeah.
But how does this apply to humans?
Well, think about situations where people feel trapped, like in an abusive relationship or a dead-end job. If they repeatedly try to change the situation but nothing works, they might develop learned helplessness and just stop trying altogether.
That's a powerful example.
Right.
It makes me realize how important it is to help people regain a sense of agency and control over their lives.
Absolutely.
But to truly understand these complex behaviors, we need a solid approach, right?
Absolutely. And that's where the experimental method comes in.
Okay.
Behavior analysis is all about controlled experiments.
Right.
A scientist in a lab carefully manipulating variables to see how they affect behavior.
So it's not just about observing people in their natural environment.
Right. Observation is important.
Okay.
But to really isolate cause and effect, you need controlled experiments. It's like testing a new drug. You need a control group that doesn't get the drug to compare to the group that does.
Right.
That way you can be more confident that any changes you see are due to the drug itself and not something else.
So behavior analysis is a science,
Yes.
not just armchair theorizing.
Exactly.
And once we understand those drivers of behavior, what can we do with that knowledge?
That's the exciting part.
Okay.
Behavior analysis has so many practical applications.
Uh-huh.
It's used in education to help students learn more effectively,
Right.
in therapy to address a wide range of psychological issues,
Okay.
and even in everyday life to improve communication and relationships.
The textbook mentions something called precision teaching. What is that?
Precision teaching is a really cool method that focuses on individual progress and frequent feedback.
Okay.
It's about helping students learn at their own pace and mastering skills through lots of practice and positive reinforcement.
So instead of just lecturing at students and hoping they absorb the information, it's about making sure each student is actually progressing and getting the support they need.
Exactly, and it's been incredibly effective.
That's great.
There's also Personalized System of Instruction, or PSI,
Okay.
which was developed based on behavior analysis principles.
Okay.
It's been shown to improve learning outcomes in college courses significantly.
I love that it's not about one-size-fits-all education.
Right.
It's about tailoring instruction to individual needs.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder why these methods aren't used more widely.
Yeah, it's a good question.
But let's not get sidetracked into education reform just yet.
Okay.
The textbook also dives into a fascinating topic that sounds a little counterintuitive.
Uh-huh.
Schedule-induced behaviors.
Yeah.
What are those?
Schedule-induced behaviors are a bit of a quirky phenomenon.
Yeah, okay.
They're basically behaviors that pop up as a byproduct of certain reinforcement schedules.
Okay.
Imagine you're a rat in a lab, and you get a food pellet every 5 minutes no matter what you do.
Okay.
What do you think happens?
Well, if I'm getting food regularly, I might start doing other things in between those deliveries,
Yeah.
like exploring my cage or maybe even grooming myself.
Right.
But why would those behaviors increase?
That's the strange part.
Right.
It seems like those seemingly unrelated behaviors are somehow triggered by the fixed schedule of reinforcement.
So it's not like I'm consciously deciding to groom myself because I'm bored.
Right.
It's more like an automatic response to the schedule itself.
That's the idea.
Wow.
And it's not just rats. Humies do this too.
Right.
Think about how you might snack more when you're studying for an exam, even if you're not really hungry.
Okay, yeah.
Or how you might check your phone more often when you're waiting for an important email.
That's so true. It's like our brains are wired to seek out some kind of stimulation, even when the primary reinforcer isn't immediately available.
And this brings us to another important concept.
Okay.
Stimulus control.
Okay.
This is all about how our behavior is influenced by the cues or signals that precede it.
So like how a green traffic light signals that it's safe to drive through an intersection.
That's a great example.
Okay.
The green light exerts stimulus control over your driving behavior.
Right.
You've learned to associate that green light with the consequence of safe passage.
Or how about the sound of a notification on my phone?
Yes.
That's a stimulus that almost always controls my behavior, making me check it immediately, even if it's probably just another spam email.
That's stimulus control in action.
Okay.
And behavior analysis goes beyond just observing these relationships. It experimentally analyzes how stimulus control is established and modified.
The textbook mentions an experiment with pigeons pecking keys of different colors.
Right.
How does that illustrate stimulus control?
In that classic experiment, researchers trained pigeons to peck a red key when a light was on
Okay.
and a green key when the light was off.
Okay.
The pigeons learned to discriminate between those two conditions
Right.
and adjust their pecking behavior accordingly.
So the light acted as a cue? A discriminative stimulus.
Exactly.
Telling the pigeons which key to peck to get the reward.
Exactly. And discrimination is a crucial part of how we navigate the world.
Okay.
It allows us to respond appropriately to different situations and stimuli.
Well, what about those times when we need to generalize our behavior?
Right?
Like how I can recognize that a Chihuahua is still a dog,
Yeah.
even though it looks very different from a Great Dane.
Exactly. Generalization is the opposite of discrimination.
Okay.
It's the ability to apply a learned behavior to similar but not identical stimuli.
Okay.
It's how we learn to categorize and make sense of the world.
So if I learn to fear bees after being stung, I might also become afraid of wasps and hornets, even though they're not exactly the same.
That's generalization in action.
Okay.
And sometimes it can be a bit overzealous, leading to unnecessary fears or prejudices.
This is also fascinating, but I have a confession.
Okay.
When I hear about behavior analysis, I sometimes worry that it's all about reducing human behavior to these simple principles.
Ah.
Like we're just robots responding to stimuli and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
What about our thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
Okay.
Behavior analysis doesn't deny the existence of thoughts and feelings.
Right.
It simply doesn't focus on them as primary explanations for behavior because they're internal events we can't directly observe or measure.
So it's not about saying that thoughts and feelings don't exist.
Right.
It's about focusing on the observable actions.
Yes.
And the environmental factors that influence them.
Exactly. But behavior analysts do recognize that thoughts and feelings can be influenced by the same principles of learning.
Cool.
Think of it like studying the workings of a car.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on the engine, the transmission, and the wheels, not the driver's thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
But we acknowledge that the driver's choices influence how the car is used.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
So even though you're not directly studying thoughts and feelings, you're acknowledging that they play a role in the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And by understanding the role of learning in shaping our thoughts and feelings, we can develop more effective strategies for addressing a wide range of psychological issues.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense now.
Good.
But we're humans, not cars.
Right.
And one thing that seems very human is our ability to make choices.
Yeah.
How does behavior analysis approach the concept of choice?
Choice, or preference, as it's often called in behavior analysis, is a fascinating area of study.
Okay.
We make choices all the time, from what to eat to who we spend our time with.
But what drives those choices?
Right.
Is it just about maximizing rewards and minimizing punishments?
It's more nuanced than that, but reinforcement certainly plays a role.
Okay.
Behavior analysts have developed really cool experimental methods for studying choice, often using animals as subjects.
Okay.
One of the key concepts here is concurrent schedules of reinforcement.
Okay.
Imagine you're a rat again, but now you have 2 levers to press,
Uh-huh.
each associated with a different reinforcement schedule.
So instead of just one option, I have a choice to make.
Exactly. And by manipulating those schedules, researchers can study how animals allocate their behavior,
Okay.
how much time they spend responding on each lever.
What have they learned from these experiments?
One of the most remarkable findings is the matching law.
Okay.
It's a principle that describes how we tend to allocate our behavior in proportion to the reinforcement we receive from each option.
Okay. I need an example.
Okay.
Break it down for me.
Let's say one lever delivers food twice as often as the other lever.
Okay.
According to the matching law, the rat will spend roughly twice as much time pressing the lever that delivers food more frequently.
So it's not just about choosing the option with the highest reward.
Right.
It's about balancing our efforts based on the rates of reinforcement.
Precisely. And what's even more amazing is that the matching law has been shown to hold true across a wide range of species, from pigeons to primates.
So is this just about animals pecking levers for food?
Right.
Does the matching law apply to humans too?
That's the intriguing part.
Okay.
It seems like it does, at least to some extent.
Okay. Think about how you choose to spend your time with different friends.
Okay.
If one friend consistently makes you laugh and feel good, you're probably going to spend more time with them, right?
It's like we're unconsciously calculating the reinforcement we get from different people
Yeah.
and adjusting our behavior accordingly.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if free will is just an illusion.
Well, that's a philosophical debate we could have for hours.
Right.
But the matching law does offer a fascinating lens for understanding human behavior in complex social situations.
Okay.
It suggests that we're constantly evaluating the payoffs of our interactions and adjusting our behavior accordingly.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is pretty amazing.
And a little bit scary if you think about it too much.
Yeah.
But before we spiral into an existential crisis,
Okay.
let's talk about another key concept the textbook covers.
Sure.
Conditioned reinforcement.
Right.
What does that mean?
Conditioned reinforcement is a really important concept in behavior analysis.
It's all about how a neutral stimulus can acquire reinforcing properties through its association with a primary reinforcer.
Okay, I'm going to need an example to wrap my head around this one.
Okay, think about clicker training for dogs.
Uh-huh.
Initially, the sound of the clicker means nothing to the dog.
Right.
But when you consistently pair that clicker sound with the delivery of treats,
Uh-huh.
something magical happens.
The dog starts to love the clicker.
Yes.
Even without the treats, they'll work hard to hear that click.
Exactly. The clicker has become a conditioned reinforcer.
Okay.
It's acquired reinforcing properties through its association with the primary reinforcer, which is the treat.
So it's like a shortcut to the good stuff.
Yeah.
The clicker becomes a symbol of the reward,
Right.
and that's enough to motivate the dog.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And conditioned reinforcers are incredibly powerful because they allow us to shape and maintain behavior even when the primary reinforcer isn't immediately available.
It's like a whole system of meaning and association is built around those primary reinforcers. It makes me think about money.
Yes.
Money itself isn't inherently rewarding, but we learn to associate it with all the things we can buy, the experiences we can have.
That's a perfect example. Money is a classic conditioned reinforcer.
Right.
And think about how we use praise and social approval to shape behavior in humans.
Right. A good job or a thumbs up can be incredibly motivating,
Exactly.
even though they're not tangible rewards.
Exactly. And this highlights how our brains are constantly making connections, linking stimuli and consequences, creating a complex web of meaning that guides our behavior.
This is seriously blowing my mind. It's like behavior analysis is giving me a whole new operating system for understanding the world.
I know, it's really fascinating stuff.
And we're not done yet.
Nope.
There's still so much more to explore.
So much more.
Bring it on. I'm ready for the next level of this deep dive.
Let's do it.
All right, I'm ready to tackle the next level, but this is the part where I always get a little intimidated. We're about to dive into language, which seems so much more complex than rats pressing levers or pigeons pecking keys.
Yeah, it's true that language is incredibly complex.
Right?
Maybe the most complex behavior humans engage in.
Yeah.
But behavior analysis doesn't shy away from a challenge.
So you're saying you can apply these same principles of reinforcement and stimulus control to something as nuanced as language.
Absolutely. Skinner, one of the pioneers of behavior analysis, dedicated a whole book to this topic called Verbal Behavior.
Okay.
He argued that language, like any other behavior, is shaped by its consequences and the environmental cues that surround it.
So instead of focusing on grammar rules and sentence structure, you're looking at how words and phrases are used to get things done in the real world.
That's a great way to plan it. Think about a baby learning to talk.
Okay.
They start with simple sounds, and those sounds get reinforced by the reactions of their caregivers.
Like when a baby says mama and their mom gets all excited and gives them a hug, that positive reinforcement encourages the baby to keep saying mama.
Exactly. And over time, the baby learns to associate specific sounds with specific outcomes.
Okay.
They learn that saying cookie might get them a delicious treat, while saying oh might get them attention and comfort when they hurt themselves.
So it's all about learning the functional relationship between words and their consequences in the environment.
Precisely. And Skinner proposed a really interesting way of categorizing different types of verbal behavior based on their function.
The textbook mentions mands and tacks.
Yes.
What are those all about?
So think of a mand as or a demand.
Okay.
It's a verbal behavior motivated by a specific need or desire. Like when you say, can you pass the salt, please? You're manding for the salt because you want it.
And the reinforcement comes from getting the salt.
Right. A tact, on the other hand, is more like a label or a description.
Okay.
It's a verbal behavior controlled by a specific stimulus in the environment. Like if you see a beautiful sunset and say, wow, look at that sunset.
Okay.
You're tacting the sunset.
And the reinforcement might come from someone else agreeing with you.
Yeah.
Or just maybe the feeling of expressing your own observation.
Exactly. So mands are about getting what you want.
Right.
While tacts are about labeling and sharing your experiences.
That's a pretty clear distinction.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine it gets more complicated than that, right?
You're absolutely right. There are more complex forms of verbal behavior, like intraverbals.
Okay, that sounds intimidating. What are intraverbals?
So think of intraverbals as responses to verbal stimuli.
Okay.
But not in a simple stimulus response kind of way. It's more about associations and relationships between words.
Okay.
Like if I say bread and
butter, it's automatic. I didn't have to think about it.
That's an intraverbal. Or if I ask you what's the capital of France,
Paris.
That's also an intraverbal.
So intraverbals are like the building blocks of conversation.
Yes.
They allow us to go beyond just labeling things and actually engage in complex dialogue.
Precisely. And it's fascinating to think about how these verbal chains are built up through reinforcement and experience.
It's like we're creating these intricate webs of meaning through our interactions with others. But there's still this part of me that wonders how behavior analysis can account for something as personal and subjective as our own private experiences.
Right.
Like, how could we explain someone saying, I'm feeling sad in terms of stimuli and consequences?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how we learn to talk about our inner world.
Okay.
Behavior analysis suggests that even private events like feelings and thoughts are influenced by the same principles of learning.
So even though we can't directly observe those internal experiences, they learn to associate them with external stimuli and consequences.
Right. Imagine a child who falls and scrapes their knee.
Right.
They cry, and their parent comes over to comfort them over time. The child learns to associate the feeling of pain with the verbal behavior of saying, I'm hurt, and the consequence of receiving comfort and attention.
So they're not just learning to label a physical sensation.
Right.
They're learning to communicate about their internal state
Exactly.
and get their needs met.
Exactly. And this is how we build up a complex vocabulary for describing our emotions, thoughts, and sensations, even though they're not directly observable by others.
It's like we're training ourselves to become more aware of and articulate about our inner world through our interactions with the environment.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it highlights how language and behavior are intricately intertwined, shaping both our understanding of ourselves and our ability to connect with others.
This deep dive has been absolutely mind-blowing. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how we learn, how we communicate, and how we make sense of the world around us.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And remember, behavior analysis isn't just a set of theories.
Right.
It's a powerful toolbox for creating positive change.
Whether it's helping children with autism learn to communicate, developing more effective teaching methods, or addressing societal issues like addiction or climate change.
Right.
Behavior analysis offers practical solutions grounded in scientific evidence.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to look for those opportunities to apply these principles to make a difference in your own life and the lives of others.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of behavior analysis.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights and a newfound appreciation for the power of learning. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.